There's a new group that was commissioned by the Department of Homeland Security. Their job is to look into cases of domestic terrorism, find out where the real threat is. Is it the Muslims? Are they coming? Is it right-wing militia groups? Those are all good questions. This called the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism. It's called START. Okay, and they surveyed 364 officers from across the country from 175 different state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies. So they were very exhaustive in their research to find out what the #1 problem in terms of domestic terrorism is in this country. And here's their conclusion. According to the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Response to Terrorism, better known as START, sovereign citizens were the top concern of law enforcement, even as a belief that some domestic groups, including the KKK, Christian Identity, and neo-Nazis, represent less of an actual terrorist threat when compared to a previous study. So, these groups called sovereign citizens, which are extreme fringe right-wing group that believe that the government does not have sovereignty over them, that they have sovereignty over themselves, hence none of our laws apply to them. If you see it every once in a while, you'll see they get in shootouts with cops, they'll attack a judge, etc. They're the #1 domestic threat. Not Islamic terrorism, not the KKK, not neo-Nazis, not other fringe right-wing groups. It's sovereign citizens, okay? Now, do you hear that in the press all the time? Do you hear talk of like, oh no, watch out, here comes this crazy right-wing group, sovereign citizens, domestic terrorism, sovereign citizens. There's a little bleep here and a little bleep there. What's weird is nobody ever connects the dots and say they do more acts of terrorism than anyone else does here in the U.S. What do you hear all the time, though? Oh, the Muslims, the Muslims, the Muslims. Now, have different Muslims done terrible terrorist attacks inside the United States? Absolutely. Of course, there was 9/11, which has no parallel, no equal, and that was a scarring event in the United States. All that is understandable. Since 2001, right-wing groups have done more terrorist attacks than Muslims have in this country. That's a fact. We've shown that to you over and over. And according to this most recent study, the #1 group you should worry about are sovereign citizens. Yet they get almost the least amount of coverage. Gee, I wonder if the media is pushing us in a certain direction and avoiding other problems. Now, there is one guy who does know about how dangerous sovereignty can be. He was asked about it. Surprisingly, it was President Bush, and this is what he had to say about sovereignty.
Yeah, tribal sovereignty means that it's sovereign. You've been given sovereignty, and you're viewed as a sovereign entity. Okay. And therefore, the relationship between the federal government and tribes is one between sovereign entities.
Surprisingly lighthearted way to end that story. I'm pretty sure he wasn't talking about sovereign citizens. And by the way, the Bush administration actually did spend considerable resources into looking into domestic terrorism. The Department of Homeland Security came up with a report commissioned by the Bush administration which said that it was a significant problem. When that report commissioned by the Bush administration was released under the Obama administration, right-wing talk show hosts and Fox News flipped out. And what did the Obama administration do? As usual, they capitulated and brought down the number of agents looking into domestic terrorism from right-wing groups from 25 to just 1 agent. Gee, I wonder why they're exploding in number of attacks that they're doing and the threat that they pose the rest of us Americans.